The glass doors of the Magnolia Pines Country Club gleamed in the Kentucky afternoon sun like something out of a magazine. I'd driven 6 hours and 47 minutes to stand in front of them. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the clock since Fort Braxton, measuring every mile against every minute of leave I'd fought like a courtroom battle just to earn. 7 hours. 7 hours of orange construction cones, lukewarm gas station coffee that tasted like burned ambition, and a car AC unit that kept threatening to give up the ghost somewhere around the Tennessee border. 7 hours, and now my own mother was standing between me and my little sisters, wetting like a bouncer at a club I wasn't on the list for. I laughed, not the kind of laugh that means something is funny, the kind that escapes your mouth when your brain simply cannot process what your eyes are seeing fast enough to produce a more appropriate reaction. What I managed. My mother folded her arms across her chest. It was a small movement, barely anything, but I'd been watching that posture my entire life and I knew what it meant. It meant the decision had already been made before I arrived. It meant this conversation was theater, not negotiation. Sarah wants it to be a private family moment, she said. I looked past her shoulder. 2 enormous white tents billowed in the breeze. A string quartet played near an Italian marble fountain. Valets in red vests jogged between cars. I counted at least 90 people milling around the entrance alone. That's private, I said flatly. My father materialized beside her like he'd been waiting in the wings. He placed one careful hand on my arm. Lauren, he said, please don't make this a situation. Don't make this a situation. As if I was the situation. As if I had somehow caused this by showing up to a family wedding I hadn't been told I was unwelcome at until I was already standing in the parking lot. I looked past both of them into the open ballroom beyond the entrance. Champagne flutes caught the light on servers' trays. White roses, the expensive imported kind I'd helped pay for, I knew the price of imported flowers from years of bailing out family emergencies, climbed every surface like something from a royal wedding. And there, near the carved staircase, stood my little sister Sarah, 31 years old, radiant in ivory lace. She was laughing at something a guest had said, her hand pressed to her collarbone the way she did when she was genuinely delighted. She looked up, our eyes connected across the space. For one single second, I was her big sister again. I was the one who'd walked her to kindergarten when she refused to go without me. I was the one who'd worked double shifts at a restaurant during community college so our mother could keep the electricity running after Dad lost his job. I was the one who'd wired money from overseas during deployments, who'd answered 2 a.m. phone calls about overdrafted accounts, who'd shown up first and left last for 15 years. Then she looked away, deliberately, like flipping off a light switch. That hurt in a place that had nothing to do with the wedding. My mother cleared her throat. There's a live stream link, you can still watch everything. Online, I finished. It'll be lovely, the camera quality is. There's a live stream. My father nodded with the relieved energy of a man who thinks he's witnessing a crisis pass. That's probably the best option, all things considered. Probably best. I have replayed those 2 words in my mind more times than I can count since that afternoon. Probably best. As though my presence were a weather event they'd decided to root around. As though the person who had spent 20 years being the family's load-bearing wall had been quietly reclassified as a structural inconvenience. I want to tell you that I erupted, that I marched through those doors with the energy of someone who had absolutely nothing left to lose and scattered the truth like shrapnel across the champagne tables. I want to tell you, I made it impossible to ignore me. I didn't. Because heartbreak doesn't always make you loud. Sometimes it strips you so completely quiet that the only thing left is the sound of your own breathing. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at the ballroom full of strangers celebrating my sister's wedding. I looked once more at Sarah, who was still not looking at me. Got it, I said. Just that, 2 words. Then I turned around and walked back across the parking lot. Nobody called my name. Nobody ran after me. Nobody came. I have thought about that part the most, not what they did, but how effortless it was for them to let me walk away. The ease of it, like exhaling. I climbed into my truck, shut the door, sat with my hands on the steering wheel and the engine off while wedding guests flowed past me into a celebration I'd been quietly erased from. A woman in a blue dress hurried by carrion. An enormous gift bag. A family with two small children in their Sunday best laughed about something I couldn't hear through the glass. Life moved, it didn't pause for me. I started the engine. A country station was still playing, something old and twangy that had kept me company on the drive down. Today it sounded like a stranger talking. I pulled out of the lot. About 40 minutes later, I stopped at a truck stop off the interstate. The kind of place that smells like diesel and burned coffee and deep fryer grease and somehow, inexplicably, also cinnamon. Truckers moved through in their comfortable rhythm. Nobody looked at me. Nobody knew my name. I bought a coffee I had no intention of drinking and sat in my truck watching the world rotate without me. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Relatives sending wedding photos. Sarah in her veil. People I recognized clinking champagne glasses. Heart emojis. Congratulations. Nobody wondering why I wasn't in a single frame. I opened a text to Sarah 3 different times, wrote 3 different messages, deleted all 3. If she had wanted me there, I would have been there. That was the simple truth settling over me in that truck stop parking lot like a fog I couldn't drive out of. For years, I had told myself a story. That things were improving, that my parents valued me, that Sarah appreciated everything I had quietly, consistently done, that someday the family would see me as a person instead of a problem-solving mechanism. Sitting in that parking lot with a cooling coffee and a phone full of wedding photos I wasn't in, I understood something. I had spent the better part of 2 decades working to earn a place that was supposed to be mine by birthright. And I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. The sun started dropping toward the horizon. Orange light stretched across the asphalt. A trucker climbed into his rig and pulled out without ceremony. Life moved forward again, the way it always does. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, started the engine. Before I pulled back onto the highway, I said something out loud. No one heard it but me. Okay. And then, after a breath, I'm done. I thought the worst of it was behind me. I was spectacularly wrong. 12 days after the wedding, I was sitting at my desk in the motor pool office at Fort Braxton on a Tuesday afternoon that had no ambitions beyond being hot and loud. Someone outside was reversing a vehicle, and the backup alarm was cutting through the walls in 3-second intervals like a mechanical heartbeat. My coffee had gone cold. My left knee, an old gift from a training exercise 2 years back, was doing the thing it did when rain was coming. My phone buzzed. Mom! I stared at it, the way you stare at something that you know is going to hurt before you touch it. She hadn't called since the wedding. Not once. No check-in, no explanation, no casual text that people send when they know they've done something wrong but aren't ready to say so. Just silence, the kind that pretends it isn't saying anything while saying everything. I answered. Hello. She didn't return the greeting. My card isn't going through. Her voice had the particular edge she used when she believed she was owed something immediately. I pulled the phone from my ear and looked at it. I'm sorry. The venue called, the final balance didn't process. A pause designed to imply I should already understand what she needed. We need you to cover it. The backup alarm outside beeped 3 times into the silence. You're calling me, I said slowly, about a payment for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. Don't start, Lauren. How much? She exhaled, $23,000. The number sat in the air like smoke. $23,000. For imported roses and champagne and a string quartet at a venue where I'd been asked to watch through a screen from a parking lot 40 minutes away. Mom, I said, I never agreed to pay for Sarah's wedding. You always help, said simply, without irony, as if the sentence were a mathematical law. I was locked out. Don't be dramatic. That word, dramatic, I had been called difficult. Stubborn, cold, too independent, too military, hard to love, but dramatic, after being turned away from my own sister's wedding and then called 12 days later for $23,000, was nearly impressive in its audacity. "Mom," I said, my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not paying." She gasped, an actual gasp, like I'd suggested something genuinely shocking rather than the most obvious thing in the world. "Your name is on the paperwork," she said. Everything in the office went still around me. "What paperwork?" "The venue documents, a guarantor agreement, you always." "I never signed anything." A pause, the wrong kind of pause. "Mom," I stood up slowly and shut the office door. "What paperwork?" "Emily said it was standard, a backup payment contact." "Mom," my hand was cold on the door handle. "I never signed anything." "Well," she said, and then nothing followed it. I hung up. My hands were not entirely steady. I noticed that with some irritation, because I had briefed rooms full of senior officers without flinching, managed supply crises at 2 in the morning, navigated situations that would make most people's knees buckle. But my mother, with one phone call, could still make me feel like I was 12 years old and somehow responsible for something I hadn't done. I found the venue's number online and called before I'd thought too carefully about it. "Good afternoon, Magnolia Pines Events, this is Christine." I gave my name. The professional warmth in Christine's voice shifted into something more careful. "Ms. Calloway, we've actually been trying to reach you. I need to see everything that has my name on it." "Of course, are you disputing?" "I never agreed to be a financial guarantor for anyone's event." Silence, then, "Let me pull the file." She came back different, more human, less script. "Ms. Calloway, we have you listed as secondary financial guarantor on the final balance. We also have what appears to be a copy of your driver's license, a personal email address associated with your military service, and an electronic signature on the agreement." "My driver's license." "Send it to me," I said, "everything." 5 minutes later, the email arrived. I opened the PDF. My full legal name, my driver's license, my old Kentucky license, the one with the unflattering photo from 6 years ago, my email, and a signature that looked, at a casual glance, like mine. But I knew immediately it wasn't. I always curl the bottom of my capital L without thinking. It's not deliberate, it's just a habit my hand developed somewhere in middle school and never unlearned. The signature in that document had the right general shape, but the curl wasn't there. Someone had studied my signature carefully enough to copy its architecture, but not carefully enough to catch the detail that made it mine. That small gap between what was real and what was forged made me sicker than anything else, because it meant someone had tried, had looked at my name and practiced it, had put effort into deceiving me. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling until the fluorescent lights blurred. My father had used my information on a loan application. He said it was just to check eligibility. My mother cried about stress. Sarah said I was overreacting. I let it go. That's what families learn when you absorb something you shouldn't. They don't see forgiveness. They see an unlocked door. I forwarded everything to my personal email. I saved every file. Then I walked to the printer and printed every page. My hands were steadier by then. Not because I felt calm, because something had fundamentally reorganized itself inside me. This wasn't family drama. This wasn't a misunderstanding I could smooth over with a phone call and a check. This was my name, my credit, my military career, my life. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not trying to figure out how to fix their problem. I was trying to figure out how far they had gone. I was at the legal assistance office before they unlocked the door the next morning. I wish I could tell you I walked in feeling righteous and unshakable. I felt embarrassed. That caught me completely off guard. I had not forged a single signature. I had not made a single false promise to a single vendor. And yet, sitting across from the JAG attorney with my folder of printed evidence, my face burned like I was the one who'd done something wrong. That's what decades of family conditioning will do. It makes their choices feel like your shame. The attorney was a captain named Rebecca Morales. Late 30s, precise posture, eyes that had clearly heard everything. She read through the documents without interrupting me once, which was somehow more nerve-wracking than if she'd reacted dramatically. After about 15 minutes, she set the first contract down and tapped the signature line with her pen. "You're saying this is not your signature." "It's not. And you did not authorize anyone, your sister, your mother, anyone, to sign on your behalf." "No." "You made no verbal or written agreement to serve as a financial guarantor." "None." She nodded. "Then you need to treat this as identity misuse and potential document fraud." The words landed in the room like dropped stones. Document fraud. It sounded enormous, official, criminal in a way that felt too large for the people I grew up with, too sharp-edged for the woman who used to pack my lunch and the girl I'd walk to kindergarten. Captain Morales must have read something in my face. "I'm not here to tell you what to do emotionally. That belongs to you. But legally, the priority is protecting yourself." I stared at the small paper cut on my thumb from printing all those pages. Funny the things you notice when your world is being rearranged. If I just refuse to pay. You dispute it formally and in writing with every vendor. You document everything. You don't negotiate by phone if you can help it. You don't admit any responsibility in any form, and if someone accessed your identification, you lock your credit immediately. I almost smiled. Happy wedding season. Captain Morales almost smiled back. Family cases tend to be the worst. That afternoon I made calls from my truck during lunch. Venue first, then florist, then caterer, then photographer. I kept my voice completely level. That required more effort than most things I've done in uniform. Every call added another piece to the picture. The florist. "Oh yes, Lauren, your sister mentioned you'd be assisting with the remaining expenses." Assisting, as if I had volunteered to carry centerpieces after the reception. The caterer forwarded an email chain. Sarah had written, "My sister Lauren is our safety net for final costs. She's military, very financially stable." Very financially stable. I read that sentence 4 times. My truck needed 2 new tires. My couch was a Facebook marketplace find I'd been planning to replace for 18 months. I bought the store brand of almost everything unless there was a sale. But in Sarah's operational version of reality, no spouse and no children apparently translated to a personal treasury available for wedding expenditure. The photographer sent over a signed addendum. Same fake signature, same missing curl on the L. By Friday, I had a stack of evidence spread across my kitchen table. Printed emails, contracts, screenshots, phone logs with times and names. I had spent years keeping supply records clean enough to pass inspection. Once I stopped shaking, documentation came as naturally as breathing. That was the first moment I recognized something important. They had made plans for Lauren the daughter. They had not accounted for Lauren the non-commissioned officer. Christine from the venue called back on Saturday morning. "Ms. Calloway, I found something else in the event file you should be aware of." My chest tightened. "What is it?" "There's a recovery email address attached to the account that was used to create the electronic signature. It isn't yours." She read it to me. Sarah's email address. Her married name already built into it, like she'd created the account knowing exactly what she intended to do. I stood in my kitchen on the cold tile floor and held the phone and said nothing for what felt like a long time. Outside my window, someone was mowing grass. A kid on a bicycle was laughing at something. A car door slammed. Normal Saturday, normal world. Inside my apartment, 15 years of a relationship shifted on its axis. My sister had signed my name. She had looked at my identity like a spare key that happened to fit, and she had used it. That should have made me only furious, and it did, but below the fury was something older and rower, grief, the kind that makes your body feel heavy and slow, like moving through water. I remembered Sarah at 5 years old, refusing to let go of my hand at the school door. I remembered the purple backpack I'd bought her when Mom said money was too tight for new things. I remembered her calling me from a college dorm at midnight, crying about an overdrafted account, and me wiring money from a barracks room in Texas without hesitating. I had protected that girl for the better part of my life. And she had used the shape of my name like it belonged to her. I thought that was as far down as it went. Then Christine sent one more attachment. The moment the image loaded, I knew exactly where my driver's license had come from. 2 years before, during deployment, my mother had called me in a state of controlled panic. She needed a copy of my ID and insurance information for family medical paperwork. Dad was having some kind of tests. The hospital was being difficult. She needed someone organized to help because no one else could handle it. So I sent it, because I always did. I called my mother that night. Captain Morales wouldn't have approved, but some part of me still needed to hear the explanation before I fully believed the truth. She answered on the 4th ring. "Are you ready to stop being cruel?" I almost hung up. "Did you give Sarah my driver's license?" Silence, just enough of it. She needed documentation for the venue. She needed my ID to put my name on a contract I didn't sign. Don't use that language. What language, Mom? What word should I use? She was overwhelmed. There it was, the family translation engine running perfectly. Theft became overwhelmed. Forgery became pressure. My anger became cruelty. Did Dad know? Her voice went thin. Your father doesn't need more stress right now. Which meant yes, maybe not every detail, but enough. I didn't sleep much that weekend. 10 hours total across 3 nights. I ate things I didn't particularly want, crackers, cold leftover. Pizza, a handful of chocolate chips, straight from the bag, because I couldn't summon the energy to make anything real. By Monday morning, standing in front of my bathroom mirror in uniform, I looked like someone who had been at war with paperwork for 2 weeks. Which, technically, I had. I opened my banking app. I looked at my savings. I am going to be honest about this part, because it matters. I almost paid it. Not because they deserved a single cent. Because I was tired enough that even surrender felt like rest. Because some part of me had been trained for so long to absorb family damage that it had become almost reflexive, like flinching before the blow lands. Then an email arrived from the venue's billing department. Final notice. My name in the subject line. They're dead attached to my identity. Something inside me went very still. Not snap, not break, settle. I opened a new message. I did not authorize these charges. I dispute all financial responsibility for this event. I attached the timeline, the documents, the forged signature comparison, the denial, the request for written confirmation. I copied Captain Morales, then I sent versions to every vendor. After that, I locked my credit, changed every password, filed an identity theft report, and saved every text message my family had sent in the previous month. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick and scared and deeply sad. I felt like someone who had just stepped onto a road with no exit ramp. But for the first time since I'd been turned away from that country club entrance, I wasn't trying to figure out how to save them. I was trying to figure out how to save myself. Here is something nobody warns you about when you finally set a real boundary with people who have never encountered one from you. They panic. For nearly 2 weeks after I disputed the wedding charges, my phone felt like it was being attacked. Texts, missed calls, voicemails, emails, Facebook messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years who suddenly had very strong opinions about family loyalty. I made the mistake of answering some of them. Every single conversation followed the same script. Nobody wanted to discuss the forged documents. Nobody wanted to discuss the stolen identification. Nobody wanted to discuss why I had been sent a live stream link instead of a seat at my own sister's wedding. They all wanted to discuss how hurt Sarah was, how stressed my mother was, how disappointed my father was. My feelings had apparently become the least interesting development in the whole story. So I stopped participating emotionally. I responded only through text and email when necessary. Short, factual, documented, no explanations, no defenses, no negotiations. The effect was almost immediate. When guilt stopped working, my family didn't know what to try next. My mother texted, "After everything we have sacrificed for you." I stared at that message for a full minute, wrote 3 responses, deleted them all. Finally, I wrote, "Please direct all communication about the wedding charges to email." No anger, no pain, no explanation. Just a wall. She called 40 seconds later. I didn't answer. Dad called, Sarah called, Mom called again. That night, I listened to the voicemails on my apartment balcony with a thunderstorm building somewhere to the west. Mom crying, Mom yelling, Mom informing me I was destroying the family. Then Dad, "Your mother isn't doing well." 5 words, 2 decades of emotional management compressed into one sentence. Fix it. I laughed out loud into the thick summer air. The next morning, there was a text from my father. "I've always been so proud of everything you've accomplished in your military career." I nearly choked on my coffee. The emergency compliment, the relational equivalent of breaking glass in case of fire. This same man had spent years telling neighbors the army had made me too stubborn, too closed off, too difficult to be around. He'd once asked, at a family dinner, whether I planned to act like a soldier forever. He'd told me at various points that I intimidated men, didn't know how to be soft, had forgotten how families worked. But now that $23,000 was hanging in the air, suddenly my service was impressive. I forwarded the text to my closest friend, Daria, who'd served alongside me for 4 years. She replied in 30 seconds. "Frame it, hang it above your door." I laughed so hard I startled myself. Apparently, all it took for my father to respect women in uniform was a catering invoice. The call that changed everything came on a Friday evening, as I was leaving work. Unknown number. I almost let it go. Something made me answer. "Lauren's." "Yes." A brief pause, then, "This is Marcus, Sarah's husband." The parking lot around me seemed to compress. We had never spoken, not once, not before the wedding, not after. In my mind, he had existed as a peripheral figure, the man Sarah had chosen over the ordinary consideration of inviting her out. And sister to the ceremony. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice sounded careful, genuine. "Is it true that you chose not to come to the wedding because you didn't support the marriage?" I stopped walking. "Marcus," I said, "I drove nearly 7 hours to be at that wedding. I was told to go home and watch it online." Silence. "She told me you decided not to come." I have a time-stamped photo from the parking lot. More silence, longer this time. I sat down on a concrete barrier near the lot, opened my photos, and sent him 3 things. The country club entrance with the date and time, a screenshot of the livestream invitation, and the text from my mother saying family only. 10 minutes passed. My phone rang again. Marcus's voice had completely changed, flat, like something had been knocked out of it. "She lied." I didn't answer, he already knew. Over the next hour, Marcus told me what he had thought was the truth of how the wedding was financed. He had covered a portion. His parents had covered another. Sarah had told him her family, meaning me, would handle certain remaining costs. When questions came up, she'd always had the same answer. "Lauren will take care of it. Lauren always does. Lauren doesn't mind." Listening to him describe my role in their wedding planning felt like reading a biography of someone I'd never met. A version of me that had no interior life, no needs, no exhaustion, just an endless supply line of quiet financial reliability. Then he said, "I found an email she sent me before the wedding." He forwarded it while we were on the phone. I opened it at a red light on my drive home. One paragraph, the last sentence read, "Don't stress about the final balance. Lauren will cover it, she always does." She always does. Written with the casual certainty of someone describing the behavior of a vending machine. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my building for a while, engine running, reading that sentence over and over. Sarah wasn't a villain. That was the complicated part. She wasn't calculating in a cold-blooded way. She was a woman who had spent so long watching me absorb everything that she had stopped being able to see it as taking. It had become, in her mind, simply how things worked. That didn't make it acceptable. But it made it something I could begin to understand. The following weekend, I sent Marcus a complete package of documents. No commentary, no emotional appeals, no revenge narrative. Contracts, signatures, vendor correspondence, ID scans, email chains, just facts laid out in chronological order. Facts don't need to raise their voice. 3 days later, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered before I realized. "What have you done?" Her voice was a different kind of quiet, the dangerous kind. "I sent paperwork." "You turned him against his own wife." "I sent facts, Mom." "Don't you play games with me." "If the truth feels like an attack," I said, "maybe look at where it came from." I ended the call. That evening, Marcus sent a one-line text. "I've canceled the family brunch. We need to meet everyone." I stared at my phone for a long time. The storm I had been walking away from my whole life was finally making landfall, and for the first time, I wasn't alone in it. The meeting happened on a Sunday afternoon at my Aunt Gloria's house in a small town about an hour west of Bowling Green. If someone had told me the defining confrontation of my life would happen in a yellow ranch house with wind chimes on the porch and a collection of ceramic garden frogs lining the flower beds, I would not have believed them. But real life rarely chooses dramatic settings. Most family truths finally surface in kitchens. Aunt Gloria's kitchen smelled like it always had cinnamon and percolated coffee and something permanently warm. She was 74, barely 5 feet tall, and had the particular kind of toughness that comes from outlasting hard things gracefully. I arrived 10 minutes early. Military habit. You arrive early so you can collect yourself before anything begins. I needed those 10 minutes, because despite all of it, the documents, the attorney, the evidence, the months of preparation, I was nervous standing on that porch. Not afraid, just deeply, profoundly tired. I almost turned around twice on the drive over. Then I remembered the parking lot, I remembered the livestream link, I remembered probably best. I got out of the truck. Gloria opened the door before I knocked. She pulled me into a brief, tight hug. No speech, no questions, no performance, just a hug. The kind that understands what it's for. "You doing all right?" she asked. "Working on it." She nodded. "That's good enough for today." Inside, the whole cast was assembled. Mom, Dad, Sarah, Marcus, 2 cousins, Uncle Raymond, an untouched plate of cookies in the center of the dining room table. When I walked in, the conversation stopped. Sarah looked smaller somehow, not physically so. Nothing else. The wedding brightness was gone. She stared at her own hands. Marcus sat beside her, but the space between them was its own kind of language. My mother's arms crossed the moment I sat down. Aunt Gloria poured herself coffee, looked around the table and said, "All right, who'd like to start telling the truth?" I almost smiled. Mom didn't. Lauren has always had a way of making family difficulties about herself. Mom began. Not hello, not context, not acknowledgement, straight to the tried and true. I leaned back in my chair. Interesting opening. Sarah started crying almost immediately. Soft, barely their tears. Growing up, that had been the reset button. People would pivot immediately toward comfort, toward making her feel better, and whatever hard question had been in the air would quietly evaporate. I looked at her briefly, then I looked away. My father tried to smooth the surface. "We're not here to assign blame." "We're not," I pulled a folder from my bag, "because there are quite a few names on quite a bit of paperwork." Nobody laughed. Gloria looked quietly impressed. Mom looked at the folder like it had personally offended her. "Let's talk about what actually happened," I said. I started at the beginning. The drive from Fort Braxton, arriving at the venue, being stopped at the door, the live stream invitation. The phone call 12 days later demanding $23,000, the attorney's office, the vendor calls, the forged signature with the missing detail, the driver's license copy that could only have come from one place. I didn't raise my voice once. I laid documents on the table as I spoke. Every time my mother tried to interrupt, I produced another piece of paper. Eventually, she stopped interrupting. Marcus spoke next, quietly. He told the room what he had believed and what he now knew were two different things. Sarah had managed their wedding narrative the way some people manage public relations, controlling every angle, shaping every story. Sarah sat through it with her head down. Then Marcus said, "She told me Lauren chose not to come because she disapproved of the marriage." He placed the email on the table, the one that said Lauren will cover it, she always does. The room read it, even the cousins who'd come in expecting to sit on the sidelines. My mother said, Sarah was under tremendous pressure. Not one person at the table nodded. Dad stared at the table. Then Sarah looked up. She looked directly at me for the first time all afternoon. "I was scared," she said. Her voice was quiet and raw, and I believed it completely. "Scared people ask for help," I said. "They don't take it." Nobody contradicted that. Then my mother said something that landed differently than anything else in the room. "I sent Emily the documents." The room held perfectly still. Sarah closed her eyes. Dad went rigid. Marcus slowly leaned back in his chair. There it was. My mother rushed forward immediately. I thought she needed them for vendor verification. "Mom," I said. She stopped. Everyone was looking at her now. The silence did the work that no speech could. Then Aunt Gloria reached over to the cabinet beside her, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a small spiral notebook, the kind with a rubber band around it. She put on her reading glasses, flipped through several pages, and set it flat on the table. "Sarah," she said pleasantly, "last spring you borrowed $6,200 from me." Sarah went pale. "You said it was for an emergency." No one breathed. There wasn't an emergency, was there? Sarah looked down. Gloria nodded slowly. "I write things down," she said, "because I'm old, not because I'm foolish." She looked around the table. Am I the only one? One cousin shifted in her chair, then the other. Then Uncle Raymond quietly mentioned a loan from 2 Christmases ago, then another story, then another. The amounts were not enormous, but they formed a pattern as clearly as footprints in fresh concrete. A network of quietly borrowed money, gently forgotten repayments, and one reliable assumption sitting beneath all of it like bedrock. Lauren will handle it. Lauren always handles it. I watched understanding move around that table slowly, person by person. No one needed to say it aloud, they could see it. I looked at my sister. I really looked at her, maybe for the first time in years, without the fog of frustration or old loyalty. She wasn't monstrous. She was something sadder than that. She was someone who had learned, gradually and without anyone stopping her, that consequences could always be redirected, that there was always a floor beneath her falls. Until now. I said the thing I had been carrying for most of my adult life, not rehearsed, not planned, just finally true and finally out of me. I am not your financial safety net. Silence. I am not your backup plan. Mom started crying, real crying, not the strategic kind, and I am not the family member why. Oh, keep in storage until a bill arrives. The room held. Dad looked at the table for a long moment, then he looked at me. It was Marcus who finally broke the quiet. His voice was almost a whisper. "I think Sarah and I need some time away from each other." Sarah flinched. Mom pressed her hand to her mouth. Nobody argued. Because everyone understood why. The meeting lasted another hour, but its outcome had arrived in the first 40 minutes. No screaming, no dramatic reversal, no villain confessing everything to a gasping audience. Just truth, laid flat on a table, in a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and old coffee. When I finally stood to leave, no one stopped me. No one demanded immediate forgiveness or instant reconciliation. No one told me what I owed anyone. I walked out onto Aunt Gloria's porch. The evening had cooled. The light was going orange and long across the yard. Wind chimes moved somewhere above me in a small breeze. Nothing was fixed. Nothing was resolved in any clean, satisfying way, but the truth existed outside my body now. Everyone had seen it. Everyone had heard it. And whatever happened next, no one could pretend anymore. That was enough for that day. The week after, life kept moving in that indifferent way it has. I was back at Fort Braxton by 6:30 on Monday. A specialist had requisitioned the wrong parts. 2 vehicles were behind on maintenance. Someone had lost the inspection paperwork again. The world did not pause for family implosions. Part of me was grateful. Routine is an anchor. When everything interior is shifting, it helps to have something exterior that stays fixed. The venue transferred the financial liability back to the parties who had actually made the agreements. My attorney guided me through every step. The fraudulent charges were formally removed from my name. My credit score dipped during the investigation and recovered within a few months. The first night I slept through without waking at 3 in the morning, I lay there for a moment just noting it. Peace, when you haven't had it in a long time, feels almost suspicious. Like a quiet room you keep waiting to hear noise in. The texts from my mother continued for a while. They followed their familiar patterns: guilt, pressure, gentle reminders about family loyalty and what I owed. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I stopped performing emotions I didn't feel. A boundary only works when you stop reopening negotiations on it. Over time, the messages became less frequent, then shorter, then, eventually, quieter. My father called twice over the following months. Both conversations were awkward in the way conversations are when someone is trying to reach across a distance they helped create. During the second call, near the end, he said, "I should have said something." I looked out the window at the parking lot below my apartment. A neighbor was walking a dog. 2 kids were racing bicycles on the sidewalk. "I know," I said. We didn't discuss the wedding. We didn't need to. The silence between us already understood what we meant. Sarah disappeared into her own situation. She and Marcus were living separately, not divorced, not officially anything, just apart, 2 people trying to determine whether there was still something worth salvaging beneath all the damage. I didn't seek details. That wasn't mine to manage anymore. In October, I moved into a smaller apartment closer to base. Most people might have called it downsizing. I called it right-sizing. Only what I needed. A small kitchen, a balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees already turning red and gold, and enough quiet to hear myself think. I bought a rocking chair from a couple down the street for $40. Best investment I made all year. A few weeks after that, I adopted a dog from the county shelter. His name was already Biscuit, and it suited him so perfectly I didn't change it. Part Labrador, part everything else, approximately 9 years old, with a gray muzzle and one ear that stood up while the other couldn't quite decide. He had the calm, considered energy of someone who had been through some things, and decided to be unbothered anyway. We understood each other immediately. Most evenings we sat on the balcony together, me in the rocking chair, Biscuit stretched across the floor like a very comfortable rug, and I let the quiet be quiet. I stopped filling every silence with anticipatory dread. I started seeing a therapist. That took longer than it should have, because I had spent years telling myself I was fine, just tired, just busy, just dealing with things. Which was true, but being perpetually tired while perpetually dealing with things is not actually a personality trait. It's a warning. During one session, my therapist said something I've carried with me since. "You learned that being necessary and being loved were the same thing." I sat with that for a long time. She was right. Every bill paid, every crisis absorbed, every problem solved. Ved had felt like evidence of my value, like proof of belonging. If I was useful enough, I would be loved enough. If I was indispensable, I could not be discarded. But that's not love, that's labor, and I had been confusing the two for most of my life. November arrived. Then Thanksgiving, which was quiet and mine in a way the holiday had never quite been before. Then December brought rain, and one evening my phone rang. Sarah! I stared at the screen. Biscuit raised his head from the couch cushion, looked at the phone, looked at me, then put his head back down with an expression suggesting he trusted my judgment. I answered. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sarah said, "Hi." "Hi." Another silence. The old me would have rushed to fill it, would have managed the discomfort of it by saying something warm and bridging. I waited. "I owe you an apology." No preamble, no setup, no extended explanation. I stayed quiet. "I was jealous of you," a pause. "I know how that sounds." "Explain it," I said. She exhaled. "You were the one everyone trusted, even when they took advantage of it. You were the person who could actually be counted on." I said nothing. "I convinced myself that meant you didn't need things, that needing things was my domain." Her voice cracked, just slightly. I stopped being able to see how unfair that was. Outside my window, rain moved gently against the glass. Biscuit snored. "I don't expect anything from you," she added. "I just needed to say it." I sat with everything for a moment. "I appreciate you saying it," I said. She cried softly, and then, quietly, we both laughed. Just a little. The kind of laugh that siblings sometimes share when they've finally stopped pretending. We talked for 10 more minutes. Nothing dramatic, nothing resolved. Two adults trying imperfectly to be honest with each other. When I hung up, I wished her well. That was all. No rescue mission. No money. No absorbing of anyone else's consequences. Just well wishes. And for the first time, that felt like exactly the right amount. Some months later, sitting on the balcony with Biscuit asleep beside me, and the maple leaves long since gone, and winter settling in at the edges of everything, I found myself thinking about that country club entrance again. Not with rage, not even particularly with sadness. With perspective. I had spent a long time believing that justice, when it arrived, would arrive loudly. Would arrive with the kind of clarity that feels like a movie, like the moment when everything is finally and publicly acknowledged, and the person who is wronged gets to stand in the light of it while everyone else watches. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, more gradual, more human. It felt like a Sunday morning without dread. It felt like opening my banking app and not flinching. It felt like answering my phone without bracing. It felt like sitting on a balcony in winter with an old dog who asked for nothing beyond company and an occasional treat, and understanding that this specific, simple, unhurried peace, was something I had been deferring for decades. It felt like finally understanding that the people who love you don't treat your dignity as a down payment. It felt like recognizing that being needed is not the same as being valued, and that family membership was never supposed to come with a price tag I'd never agreed to pay. I was done paying it. If you have ever been the person everyone leaned on but no one thought to protect, the one who shows up first and leaves last, who absorbs the crises and smooths the friction and quietly makes everything manageable for everyone around them, I want you to hear this. That instinct in you to care, to show up, to fix things, is not the problem. The problem is when the people you love mistake your reliability for an unlimited resource, when your willingness to help becomes their expectation of access, when your love becomes their infrastructure. You are allowed to care deeply about people without surrendering your dignity to them. You are allowed to set down weight that was never yours to carry. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for the people in your life is to stop catching them before they fall. Because people who are always caught never learn they have the ability to land. The hardest truth I carried out of that year wasn't about forgery or money or betrayal. It was simpler and more personal than all of that. I had been purchasing my own acceptance for 20 years. With labor, with money, with presence, with the constant quiet cost of never saying no. And I was done. Not bitterly done, not coldly done. Just done. Done in the way that happens when you finally understand your own worth well enough to stop selling it at a discount to people who should have known it all along. Some doors close behind you as you walk away, and the surprising thing is how much lighter you feel once you stop. Looking back at them,